Hi there, this is a video explanation of the Battle of Yorktown, the last decisive battle of the Revolutionary War. So to set the scene a little bit, a couple of important locations and actions leading up to the Battle of Yorktown. So General Cornwallis, we'll see, is the main British commander at the Battle of Yorktown, and he had been fighting a lot in the southern colonies, especially in North and South Carolina, and had been pretty unsuccessful and was feeling rather frustrated by that. And so he's the one who decides to move his British army toward Yorktown, Virginia, to try and control that port city and give the British access in and out of the colony of Virginia throughout the duration of the rest of the war. The other main location to note is New York, which is where Sir Henry Clinton, the British commander, has been occupying the city for years at this point, while George Washington, we'll see, is outside of New York as well. Okay, so some of the main characters involved in the Battle of Yorktown. For the British, we have Lord Charles Cornwallis. He had captured the city of New York way back in 1776 and had essentially been holding it ever since. He's the British commander who lost to George Washington at the battles of Trenton and Princeton, and he's the one who makes the fateful decision to bring his British army against the orders of Henry Clinton all the way from the southern colonies, the Carolinas in particular, to Yorktown. And the other British commander, Sir Henry Clinton, he's the one who's in charge of the entire British military in the colonies. He is famous for capturing Charleston the previous year in 1780, and he's going to be the one that's stationed in New York City, giving the orders for Cornwallis not to move to Virginia, but ultimately his orders won't be heard. Okay, American leaders in this battle. George Washington, he's outside of New York City. We'll see that he's got some trickery up his sleeves to help deceive the British a little bit. He's going to bring his army toward Yorktown, where he will meet up with the French forces and begin a siege of the Battle of Yorktown. And one of his most important troops is Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Hamilton, who's finally given his chance to lead some troops in the Revolutionary War, and he's going to lead the critical attack on some British defenses and turn the tide in the Battle of Yorktown. The French commanders that we'll see here, the Comte de Rochambeau is the commander of all the French forces in the colonies during this war. He is going to send the French fleet, so the ships that the French are commanding, to attack the British in Virginia, and he's going to lead the siege of Yorktown along with Washington and his American army. And then finally, the French Comte de Grasse. So he's the admiral who's in charge of the fleet that's been sailing around the Caribbean, way to the south. It's going to be his ships that join the fight at Yorktown and prevent the British from retreating by sea. So he's going to kind of blockade Yorktown and keep the British from escaping that direction. All right, so an overview of the battle. So it began in September of 1781 and lasted about 3 weeks. Took place in Yorktown, Virginia, which you can see on the map here is this port city in Virginia. And kind of setting up the scene, so George Washington had been outside of New York City and was considering attacking New York City. So he believed that it was vulnerable to attack, and in his mind, if he was able to capture New York City, that would effectively end the war. And so he was very seriously considering attacking New York City. However, the French were able to persuade him that the more important opportunity lay to the south at Yorktown. And so George Washington kind of plays this trick on Clinton and his British army in New York, where he sets up camps with fake fires and loses some papers, kind of indicating that he might be attacking New York. Meanwhile, he slips away and manages to lead his army all the way south to Yorktown, where he can attack the British kind of by surprise there. So the British had set up their defenses in Yorktown. They were trying to fortify that city, an important port, so that British ships could get in and out, especially to kind of reach supplies to the southern colonies. But American and French armies were able to surround the city. The French Navy, you can see de Grasse there is labeled in that kind of blue dotted arrow, manages to make their way north from the Caribbean and surround the British by sea. So the British Navy isn't able to attack or lead any retreat to the sea. And ultimately, there's a bombardment and a siege of the city of Yorktown, where the Americans, along with the French, essentially have the place surrounded, and they slowly move their lines closer and closer to Yorktown until eventually those British defenses are destroyed. In the end, about 8,000 British troops were forced to surrender. So Lord Cornwallis and his army were forced to give up. They weren't able to escape, and so they had really no choice but to surrender. And this became the critical loss for the British because at this point, the war had been going on for 6 years. And it was a war that the British expected to be over very quickly. They thought it would be an easy victory. But by this point, giving up 8,000 soldiers in this crushing loss at Yorktown, it kind of was a signal that enough was enough. They couldn't afford to continue this war any longer. And so they entered into peace negotiations with the Americans. The final peace treaty was signed 2 years later, but this battle at Yorktown was really the end of the war, effectively. At this point, the British were simply done. They had given up 8,000 troops again, and they felt that this war simply wasn't worth carrying on any further. So I hope this video helps you understand the Battle of Yorktown, some of the important decisions that led up to the battle itself, and ultimately why this battle was so significant. Thanks for watching.